A teen laughed at the old veteran mopping the train floor. Then a U.S. senator walked straight toward him. Part 1. He's just a janitor. Move, old man, this ain't your war zone anymore. The mop clattered to the ground. Water spilled across the marble floor of Grand Central Terminal. And Walter Briggs, 82, fell with it. His knees hit first bone to stone. A gasp cut through the 5:42 p.m. bustle like a blade. People turned, but no one moved. The boy who shoved him 17 varsity jacket earbuds hanging loose laughed and lifted his phone. Did you all see that dude's doing a combat crawl for Windex? His friends howled, one whistled, another pulled out his phone to record. Walter didn't say a word. He pressed one palm against the slick floor, trying to push himself upright. The bucket had tipped. His pants were soaked. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. But his face, it stayed still. Blue eyes staring at the ground, fixed on something only he could see. And now you're here, watching, feeling it. So let me ask you, would you have stopped him? Would you have stepped in? Comment below if you would have done something. Or if, like most in that crowd, you might have looked away. Because what happened next? No one saw it coming. Grand Central kept moving as it always does. Trains departed, announcements echoed, but around gate 23 time hung still. Walter, dripping and bruised, slowly got back up, one knee at a time. He reached for the mop. His hand shook, and still no one helped. The security guard, Linda, stood halfway down the concourse. She saw it all. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Not yet. She recognized the boys. Maxwell Ray, the ringleader, was the son of Councilman Ray, the same councilman who threatened to pull funding if the old janitor with the attitude wasn't removed. Walter straightened his back, just a bit, picked up the mop, dipped it back in the water. The same motion he'd done every evening for 9 years. He started wiping again. 1 stroke. 2. Maxwell turned to his phone and said to his live stream, "Welcome back to Max Talks Public Waste Edition. Look at this relic, folks. This is what your tax dollars pay for, a fossil with a mop." The comments rolled in fast. Put him in a museum. Bet he thinks the war's still going. Is that your grandpa or a government glitch? So dumb. And still Walter said nothing. Because when you've held dying men in the rain of Hughes City, when you've survived napalm and silence and 40 years of nightmares, words become small. But fate has its watchers. From the far side of the terminal, a train door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Heels clicked across polished stone, measured, sharp, echoing. A woman emerged through the crowd, tall navy coat, silver pin glinting, eyes forward, steps unbroken. Senator Eleanor Tate had arrived. She scanned the terminal like a sniper scans rooftops. She saw the boy, she saw the mop, she saw the old man, and she stopped walking. The boys kept laughing. Linda began walking toward them, slow at first, but Eleanor got there first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She turned to Maxwell, square and unshaken. "You just mocked the man who saved my father's life." Silence. Walter looked up. Their eyes met, and in that moment, 30 feet of polished marble became the center of the American soul. Walter didn't speak. He didn't have to. But in that quiet second, a nation was watching and listening, because a fall doesn't make history. But the way a man stands back up, that just might. And this was only the beginning. What will Maxwell do now? Will Linda finally step forward? And what secret is Walter still keeping from all of us? Like and comment part 2 if you want to know what happens next. Because sometimes the man who cleans the floor ends up cleaning the conscience of a country. Part 2. The memory he buried. She hadn't said his name yet, but Walter knew. The voice, the stance, it was unmistakable. The little girl from the hospital cot in Da Nang, the daughter of Major John Tate, and now she stood in front of 1,000 commuters like a judge, jury, and witness to forgotten honor. Walter's hand gripped the mop tighter. Senator Eleanor Tate took one more step and turned to the crowd. He saved my father during Tet 68. While others retreated, he went back. Twice. Gasps. A pause in footsteps. Even the janitorial crew across the hall stopped sweeping. Maxwell's smirk began to falter, but he kept the camera rolling. Lady, it's just a janitor. Eleanor turned slowly, locked eyes, and said, then maybe it's time this country stopped confusing silence with irrelevance. And just like that, the terminal was a courtroom. The janitor had become the defendant, and the accuser was now the one on trial. Walter didn't move, but something shifted behind his eyes. He hadn't spoken about Hugh for decades. Not to the VA, not to his union boss, not even to Linda, because some things weren't built for words. They were built for memory, and some memories once cracked spill everything. It returned in flashes, heat waves on concrete, fire on rooftops, the choking black smoke of burning silk and gunpowder, screams ricocheting off temple walls, blood soaking through his boot, and a voice, Major Tate's hoarse but clear through a broken radio, leave me. That's an order. But Walter had refused. He dragged the man through sniper alleys, a Colt in one hand, the other arm hooked under a limp shoulder. 5 blocks. Past the noodle shop with its door blown out, past a crying boy holding a sandal, past the face of an enemy soldier, barely out of his teens, frozen in time, dead behind a market stall. Walter blinked. The smell of ammonia snapped him back. Grand Central returned. Tile, noise, neon. But the silence around him had changed. It wasn't ignorance anymore. It was attention. He let the mop fall from his hand. Linda took a step forward, unsure. But Eleanor held up one hand. She wasn't done. Let him speak. Walter looked around slowly. At the crowd that once ignored him. At Maxwell still live. At the kid's phone lens trained like a weapon. He cleared his throat dry as dust. You call this floor dirty, he said. I've seen floors redder than this, covered in what boys never got to take home. A breathless silence fell. You laugh at old men cleaning up after you, Walter continued. But we cleaned up worse, and we never asked for thanks. We asked for meaning. Maxwell let out a nervous scoff. So what? You want a statue? Walter turned his head toward him, slow and unshaken. No, I want you to grow up. I want you to understand whose shoulders you're standing on. That sentence hung there unmoving. And then the unexpected happened. A man in a 3-piece suit set his briefcase down. He clapped once, then twice, then another joined, and another. Applause echoed through the terminal, not loud like concerts, but low, steady, like respect finally given breath. Travelers stood still. Amtrak staff lined up near the coffee stand. Linda pressed her lips tight, eyes misted. Walter didn't smile. He just looked at Eleanor. And she too had something left. She reached into her coat, pulled out a folded document, yellow seal, blue ribbon. This, she said, lifting it high, is the presidential citation my father requested for you in 1972. It never reached you, but it was approved yesterday. Gasps again. Phones lowered. Maxwell's live stream caught every word. Walter looked down at the document. But he didn't take it. He simply said, justice doesn't always wear medals. Sometimes it walks through a train station in heels. Eleanor nodded, moved, and stepped back. The floor was quiet. For the first time in 9 years, Walter didn't pick up the mop. Subscribe if you believe stories like this should never disappear. We have more to tell. Comment below. Has someone in your family been forgotten for their service? Write, I remember, if you believe they deserve to be seen. Part 3. When someone stands up, Maxwell Ray didn't sleep that night. Neither did Walter Briggs. Because what began as a cruel clip on a teenager's live stream had by sunrise exploded across the country. Janitor turns out to be Vietnam War hero, headlined local morning shows. Senator publicly honors unknown Marine in viral confrontation aired on national networks. And the footage of the mop falling, of Eleanor's salute, of Walter's voice, trembling but unbroken, was shared over 8 million times by noon. Grand Central Terminal had become more than a transit hub. It became a symbol. Maxwell's face a meme. His name trending for all the wrong reasons. The comments turned brutal. This is the kid who mocked a Marine. Raise your sons better. Where was his father? At City Hall, Councilman Ray ordered a private meeting. His tone wasn't defensive. It was strategic. We need to manage this. My son is 17. But justice doesn't care about optics. It cares about memory. Meanwhile, Walter arrived at work. 5 p.m. sharp. Same shirt, same mop, same boots polished dull from time. But this time something was different. Outside the janitorial locker room, someone had taped a new sign, Briggs Hall, staff room dedicated in honor of service. Inside was quiet, but a single folded note rested on the bench. You made me call my grandfather last night. Thank you. At gate 23, Walter moved like he always did, slow, steady, unnoticed. But Linda stood waiting. When she saw him, she didn't say, "Good evening." She stood at attention. "Permission to share your story, Sergeant?" she asked. Walter's gaze held hers. He gave a slow nod. "Only if you tell it true." Across town, Maxwell sat in front of a panel at his private school. His scholarship revoked, his internship cancelled, his influencer status shattered, his voice shaky. "It was just a joke," he mumbled. "I didn't know." A teacher old enough to remember the draft leaned forward. "You didn't just mock a man, you mocked sacrifice. Now you've learned what silence feels like." It wasn't punishment, it was education. And for the first time, Maxwell didn't record it. Eleanor Tate stood before the Senate Veterans Committee the next morning. Her speech was brief, but powerful. There are heroes cleaning your train stations, bagging your groceries, sitting in silence at city parks, not for glory, but because their country moved on without them. I won't let us forget them again. Applause broke the room, but Walter never saw the clip. He wasn't watching the news. He was home in an old chair, staring at a faded photo of his unit. The presidential citation hung next to it, not above, not brighter, just next to. Equal weight, equal memory. He didn't need attention or apology. He just needed someone to remember. And finally, someone had. Comment. Stand up if you believe we need more people like Senator Tate. And subscribe if you are ready for part 4, when an entire town chooses to remember. Part 4. Honor doesn't need a stage. He didn't ask for a ceremony, but the town gave him one anyway. 3 days after the video went viral, Walter Briggs was walking to his usual shift through the east entrance of Grand Central Terminal when he saw something that stopped him cold. Not the reporters waiting by the column, not the boom mics, not even the flags flanking gate 23. It was the faces, dozens of them, strangers, civilians, veterans, all standing silently, eyes on him. Hats in hand, some saluted, some cried, but none spoke. It was not a welcome. It was an apology. Linda stepped forward from the crowd and placed a small pin on his chest. It wasn't shiny, it wasn't official. It simply read, "Still serving." Walter's hands didn't shake this time. He looked up slow and steady and met every gaze. He nodded once, then turned and picked up the mop. One step forward, then another, but no one let him touch the floor. A young man in dress blues, early 20s, a Marine took the mop gently from his hand and said, "You've done enough, Sergeant." The crowd parted. Walter didn't speak. But if you looked closely, you might have seen something tremble in the corner of his eye before it vanished again. By noon, the mayor's office had issued a proclamation. April 12th would now be known as Walter Briggs Day in the city of New York. A city not known for sentiment had decided it was time to remember. And that memory had a name. That same afternoon, Eleanor Tate returned to Washington. She carried with her a proposal drafted in a single night, co-sponsored by 3 other senators and over 50 veteran groups across the country. The bill was simple but powerful. Require the Department of Veterans Affairs to re-examine all denied claims involving lost or destroyed combat records from 1955-1990. They called it the Briggs Act. And at the VA headquarters in D.C., panic began to bubble beneath the polished surface because Walter Briggs was not the only one. He was just the one who refused to be bitter, but not all were silent. Across the country, former soldiers, nurses, medics, engineers, forgotten names from forgotten files began speaking up. One man in Ohio showed his burn scars to a local paper. A woman in Nevada mailed in her father's medals with a note that read, "He never wanted them. But I think it's time." Back in the terminal, change had already begun. Gate 23, once just another departure point, had become something sacred. People started leaving folded notes under the mop closet door. "My uncle was at Quezon. I never knew my dad served until last night. Thank you for reminding me what respect looks like." But Walter didn't read the letters, not yet. He placed them gently in a shoebox behind his locker. Someday, he said, maybe. Maxwell Ray. His fallout continued. The school refused to reinstate him. His father, Councilman Ray, faced growing pressure to resign. But the real blow came when Eleanor Tate, live on C-SPAN, called out both of them by name. "There is a difference," she said, "between youthful ignorance and inherited arrogance. The former can be corrected, the latter must be voted out." The room erupted, and the clip went viral faster than the original video. That night, Walter sat in his tiny apartment on 6th Avenue, a cup of coffee cooling beside him, flipping through a dusty photo album. He paused at one picture, a group of 12 young men, shirtless and smiling, standing ankle-deep in a Vietnamese rice paddy. 11 of them were gone. A knock on the door. Linda stood there with a plain envelope. Inside was a single-page letter on Pentagon letterhead. "Mr. Briggs, we regret the mishandling of your records. Effective immediately, your benefits have been reinstated with back pay. A representative will contact you to assist." But Walter didn't smile. He simply folded the letter and placed it inside the album, right next to the picture of his squad, then closed the book. Because for Walter, the greatest honor wasn't the benefits, it was being remembered without having to ask. If you've ever known someone who served quietly, without fanfare, write "I remember" in the comments. Because these stories don't end on a battlefield. They end in places like Gate 23, in mop closets, in broken records, in silence. And if you believe more towns should do what New York just did, subscribe. Part 5 will show you how one forgotten Marine became the reason a whole generation stood taller. Part 5. He became the living memorial. It wasn't the parade that made him cry. It was the child's drawing. 2 weeks after the Briggs Act passed its first committee vote, Walter walked into the terminal and found a small hand-drawn picture taped to his locker. Crayon colors, a little stick figure in a janitor uniform. Above it, written in clumsy block letters, were the words, "Thank you for fighting and cleaning." No name, just a heart, just a truth. He stared at it for a long time. Then he sat down on the bench beside his mop and wept for the first time in 47 years. This is where the story could have ended. A man redeemed, a community awakened, a country reminded. But Walter Briggs was not a symbol to be boxed up and forgotten again. He was still alive, still walking, still showing up. And because of that, something bigger began. Grand Central didn't return to normal. Gate 23 slowly turned into something else. Veterans started showing up there. Quiet men in flannel and boots. Women in faded flight jackets. Some saluted the mop closet. Others just stood as if waiting for something they didn't know they needed. A place. A name. A moment. Linda, moved by what she witnessed, requested permission to create a permanent display inside the terminal. The transit authority declined, but the public didn't. A petition gained over 400,000 signatures in 5 days. And then the flood came. Former Marines from Walter's old unit showed up one by one. The ones still breathing, grey limping but proud. They came with photos, with stories. One held up a rusted Zippo lighter. Etched on its side, "Briggs saved me. You, 68. Soon a permanent plaque was installed beside Gate 23. It didn't have a statue, just words carved into brushed steel, for the ones who never asked to be remembered, and the ones who did it anyway. The dedication ceremony was simple. Walter didn't speak, but he was there seated quietly in the second row, hands clasped over his knees. When they unveiled the plaque, he didn't look at it. He looked at the crowd. And in that crowd, something unexpected appeared. Maxwell Ray, clean-shaven, dressed simply, no cameras, no father, just him. He stood in the back holding his hat in both hands, eyes locked on the man he had once humiliated. After the crowd thinned, he approached slowly. No entourage, no words rehearsed. Walter noticed. "Something you want to say, son?" he asked. Maxwell swallowed. "I don't deserve to." Walter studied him. Not the clothes, not the posture. The eyes, then nodded slowly. "Then say it anyway." Maxwell looked down. "I'm sorry, sir, for what I said, what I did, for thinking the world started with me." There was a pause, and then something even more unexpected. Walter extended his hand. Maxwell shook it. That moment, recorded quietly by someone in the crowd, became its own kind of ending. Not a twist, but a reckoning. Councilman Ray resigned the following week, citing a need to reflect. Eleanor Tate was nominated to chair the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. And, Walter. He finally took a day off. He used it to visit a classroom in the Bronx where a young teacher had played his video for her students. She invited him in to talk. He didn't lecture. He didn't dramatize. He just brought his mop, stood in front of 30 kids and said, "Your future depends on what you remember and what you refuse to forget." They listened like the world depended on it, because maybe in a way it did. In his final days at the terminal, Walter was offered everything: interviews, medals, even a book deal. He declined them all, but he made one small request. He asked that a second plaque be placed beside the first, smaller. Not about him. It read, "Honor doesn't need a stage, just memory and the courage to keep showing up." If this story moved you, if you believe we need more men like Walter and more chances to get it right, comment. We remember below. And before you go, ask yourself this: how many Walters are still out there, silent, forgotten, walking past us each day? Will you see them next time? Because sometimes the most heroic thing a man can do is mop a floor no one else even sees.